developing Asian economies to catch up?
Thanks, Sean, for the invitation. And before I answer this question, let me...
An anti-dam, from an anti-dam collective, Dibang Resistance. So our river Dibang is one of the tributaries that flows from Sangpo, from Tibet to India, then it becomes Brahmaputra and flows to the Bay of Bengal. So it's one of the largest river basins. So I want to take the angle of risk assessment that you guys have been mentioning. So I would like to take this opportunity also to inform you that we are in seismic zone 5. In my valley alone, we have had in 1 century, we have had more than 160 earthquakes recorded. And in fact, 8.6 magnitude was one of the largest, earthquakes in our valley, where the world's largest dams are being proposed. One is on the table, and the other one is already, been passed. So I think like I really want to put it to Professor Surya Dev as well, that when we talk about, like a green sense of energy, like, I mean, in the Northeast, especially, there is very, very severe violations of human rights and also environmental, there's no compliance with the EIA, environmental impact assessments. And these are the world's largest dams. We are talking about 3,000 plus megawatt, 2,000 plus megawatt. We're not addressing really like 60 megawatt or 40 megawatt, right? And in a very seismic zone area. Like, so what are the risk assessment we, really address when we talk about like addressing policies, etc., indigenous values, etc., right? I mean, there's a whole stream there. I mean, this voluntarily, we always know that, this is right, but mandatorily, as Matthew speak, I think I agree more with what we should do is like prosecute really, the companies that have been forever violating these rivers.
Yeah, ma'am, are you asking for comment, or do you have a very specific question you would like to put to?
Yeah,
so just some reflections.
Yeah, so the question was, like, what about the risk assessment? Like, given that we are in very highly seismic zone areas, we have the largest dams of the world, tallest gravity dam being, allowed in our space in the seismic zone area. Where are we going from here?
What role of risk assessments and given the magnitude of the challenge? Weena, do you want to give that a shot, and then I'll pass it over to Surya.
Yeah, the whole question of dam is confusing. There was a huge report done, the World Dam report that was done way back, right? And there's a whole assessment of what is sustainable dams, right? And I think I'm confused as to why this whole debate has come back in the world on dams, right? Because dam has such huge environmental impact, massive. Here in Thailand too, we've had in Thailand, the Thai government has actually been approached by many civil society groups within the Mekong region complaining because a lot of the dams are actually funded by Thai banks, supported by Thai governments, right? And it's sad that these things happen. I think there is the issue of, I mean, it's a whole ecosystem, but one thing that can actually be done, and a lot of people don't look at it in that perspective. I'm a financial economist by training. Going to the banks who actually fund it, because don't forget, banks get money from our deposit money, right? And then they go forth and they get into these huge project financing transactions, and it's devastating to the environment that we're all living in. So that's one big leverage that can be done, and that's one angle that a lot of groups have approached, which is to follow the money, because without that, these projects, it's very hard to get them going.
Surya?
I mean, risk assessment is complicated in situations of dam because companies or the governments already decide that this project has to go ahead. And then the risk assessment is done merely to tick the boxes and get the so-called approvals. I think that is problematic. So I would say that before a dam or any project is conceived, merely on paper as an idea, with no architect hired, no financial put in place, then we should consult with the local communities and look at the impact. Because the difficulty is that who is going to benefit from the energy that is going to be generated by a particular dam? Perhaps those indigenous people, local tribal community, they may not be getting the benefit. They may be adversely impacted. So I think that is so it's not merely about energy safety and security. I would also consider, and it goes back to my point about degrowth, we need to reduce the energy consumption as well. When I was growing up as a child in my village in India, there was no electricity. So my father told me, you should put your goods in a room in a way that you can find in darkness. So can we survive without electricity? Yes, we used to. Can we eat our dinners before sunset? Yes, we can. So I think I'm talking about those fundamental changes in how we are living in this planet. And I don't think the risk assessment and human rights due diligence narrative that is predominant is capturing those transformative changes that I'm talking about here.
And that's something you're speaking to the degrowth idea. And as you say that, and give us very specific illustrations of what you mean. Thank you very much to both of the respondents. We have a second question here. In the interest of time, we have 15 minutes. Very specific question. And then to my panelists, please also answer quickly too, so we can reach as many people as possible.
ก็พยายามจะพูดให้ช้าๆนะคะแต่ว่า
community inner region mining of coal, production of oil and gas, and existing and construction of big dams are causing a huge biological impact on the environment. Mining of coal and production of oil started way back in the colonial era. Now we have a recently amended Mines and Mineral Act in India where emphasis is given on self-reliance, but this will lead to devastating consequences for our people. Our rivers are turning black due to coal mining. The river ecosystem is changing. Oil and gas production, oil and gas leaks from wells and pipelines are leading to air, water, and soil pollution. The whole biodiversity is changing. Moreover, huge fines and huge taxes and fines are being imposed for pollution by vehicles while they themselves allow deforestation in the name of businesses. Also, many activists are being detained for calling out for different issues, including environment due to the draconian law called Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958, which is still imposed in Northeast India. So I have a question. What are the mandatory steps this forum will suggest to our government so that top priority is given to human environment before any business practices, as the already existing environmental laws and human rights are being violated completely? Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to put that question to someone on our panel? Or
Anyone who can answer.
Diane, do you have a few things to offer? You haven't answered a question.
The mandatory, the top recommendations?
Yeah, to what extent, if I may, sir, could you repeat the question at the very end there where you speak to mandatory provisions?
Yeah, what are the mandatory steps this forum will suggest to our government that top priority is given to environment before any business practices, as the already existing environmental laws in our country is being violated completely?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think some of these sort of key steps or priority mandatory regulations that we should have should include things like polluter pays principles, like Weena mentioned earlier, because that really does internalize the externality. So that means that the company or the business that is producing, that has the coal mine, they have to bear the costs of the environmental impact and the associated health impacts on the local population. Without something like the polluter pays principle, then it's the local population that has to bear the whole cost, or it's the overall general taxpayers who have to pay the cost through increased healthcare burdens, for example, on the population. So I think polluter pays should really be a gold standard as a starting point.
And I think, thank you, Diane. I think Surya also has a response.
I just wanted to add a footnote to the polluter pays principle because it has come up several times on the panel. And I completely agree we need to adopt this principle. But I also wanted to add a limitation. Many businesses would think that we are willing to pay this much of a fine as part of the polluter pay because we're going to make much more profit. So I think the polluter pays principle also has limitations. So I wanted to flag it. And that's where I think what I will call the red line approach becomes crucial. Certain things should not be allowed on the part of businesses, period. Then we don't need to bring in that cost element in those issues.
Thank you, Surya. And I'm going to ask each speaker hereafter, and Surya, you just had your that opportunity. In the remaining 60 seconds we have to either respond to that last question or to make an important point that they want this group here to leave with. So let me start with Matthew.
Thank you. And I think it's the theoretical and the practical. So one thing that is so vital, and I heard it yesterday, I hear it today, is the role of environmental and human rights defenders. And we're at this panel on business and human rights where my very good friend, Vicky Bowman, the director of the Myanmar Center for Responsible Business, was arrested by the Myanmar dictatorship 3 weeks ago and has been sentenced to a year in jail because of her visa issues, failure to report. But the consequence of that arrest, which was clearly illegal, clearly unconstitutional, clearly in violation of her human rights, has meant that one of the great centers dealing with responsible business in Myanmar and in this region has now closed, which shows that without protecting our environmental and human rights defenders, none of this discussion matters, because the people who are protecting the environment, protecting their societies need to be protected so that they can say and talk to business and government. The second thing is that all of the things we are talking about, whether it's degrowth or environmental, the application of principles such as environment, social government, risk or risk assessment and due diligence, all of these things have to occur at every single stage of the project cycle. The feasibility, we've now got to get the banks involved, the financial institutions, the governments, the regulators, the enterprises who are doing the construction, how they treat their workers, how they treat their communities. And if they fail to live up to the standards, we have to take them to court, the court of public opinion. We have to make complaints about them. We have to demonstrate that compliance with those norms of human rights and environmental protection are what is needed now. And if that costs a little bit more, if that forces some businesses not to dam our rivers and chop our trees down, well, that's a good thing. And so that's what I would have to say. Protect our environmental and human rights defenders so they can make sure these things are brought, and make sure every part of the development cycle is acquainted with the need for environmental and social obligations and human rights protections. And let's make them live up to that obligations.
Thank you, Matthew. That's a very powerful statement. And on behalf of Vicky and all environmental human rights defenders, 30 seconds or less.
Okay, I speak very fast. A couple of things. First of all, I think a lot of what I hear from yesterday and today goes to the point that I think a lot of people aren't being heard. There are a lot of violations happening, and I think it speaks. I mean, degrowth. I do agree with that. There needs to be a thinking on that, but also what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. And one of the things I wish more governments would look into is the concept of a well-being budget. How you can say any of the projects you want to go ahead with, what is the implication intergenerationally? Can you justify it? Because that's how it all starts off, right? You can't justify it intergenerationally, then it should not go ahead. And the environment is definitely part of all of that. So I think that this part is gravely missing. The other part, I must say, Sean, just to be a little bit controversial, this is a responsible business and human rights forum. I don't see a lot of representation from business. They're not here. I don't see a lot of representation from policymakers too, which is gravely needed.
On that note, though, there are a number of business associations here that do represent other businesses. So we have the Responsible Business Alliance, the Global Compact Networks are here. A number of different Global Business Initiative is also here representing large multinationals. So they are represented through their representatives.
Okay, that's great. Sorry.
But I would also like to suggest that there are actually individual company representatives here too. It's sustainability, working in sustainability field.
Just one final note I want to say about on the sustainability angle and on environment. I think I don't know if people know this in Thailand. In northern part of Thailand, you have children about 14 years old getting abnormal growth on their lungs, right? This is a telltale sign of lung cancer. And I know it gets really bad because I know in India, their children are about 8 or 9 years old getting similar things, right? So I think what I wanted to end with is this is something that is, you know, if you take your hat off, it's all about us, right? It's about your life and the life of your kids. There is no us or them in all of this debate. And I do wish that all hands would be on deck in terms of solving the environmental crisis that we are all facing. Because as a global community, we have done that before. September 16th was the anniversary of the Ozone Day. The world did come together and solve that crisis 35 years ago successfully. And it needed everybody and every hands on deck. Unfortunately, I don't know why that doesn't seem to be the case on environmental issues, whether it's air pollution or anything else. Yeah.
Thank you, Weena. We're going to give the last word to Diane, and unfortunately have to close out our session.
Okay, thank you. Well, I agree with everything my panelists have suggested so far. I think just a final note that we mustn't forget about informal workers who fall outside often of legal frameworks and so get left behind. We have to recognize they also have a right to earn their livelihood. And so there's a responsibility here on governments to provide the necessary framework to support them and the environment in which they work. So access to insurance, social security, but also help them, for example, if we're shifting towards a greener economy, to be able to access the greener technologies that they need, the safety equipment that they need to be able to work safely without being penalized. So that doesn't mean target taxi drivers for taking their cars off the road because their cars are old, but rather work with taxi drivers to find a solution that they can afford so that they can continue to earn a livelihood whilst also polluting less with their cars.
Thank you very much, Diane. We will need to start unpacking what those solutions are, though, in new rounds, because we keep saying we need to find solutions, but those solutions now need to get on the table and fast. I did have a conclusion to make myself, but we are out of time. A sweeping conversation that was also well informed by lots of interesting detail. I think you'd agree. This was an excellent conversation and one that we're going to have many, many more times going into the future. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here.